With the midterm elections approaching, we're talking campaign style. Now, Maeve, you've covered 3 presidential elections, and in 2012 you were on the campaign trail with Romney.
Right.
You started this cool Instagram project called Campaign Fashion Report, hashtag Campaign Fashion Report, I should say. And I actually followed it back then. I was doing work on politics, and I was a follower and fan of yours.
Oh, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you started it, why you started it, and what kind of success you've seen from it?
Well, it really was more of a whimsical thing than anything. But as a campaign reporter, you're often out in as many as 4 states a day, and spending a lot of time waiting for the candidate to actually come on stage. And so obviously you're sort of milling through the crowd, talking to voters about what issues matter most to them. And people take what they wear to political rallies really seriously. They get really into it. It's kind of like dress up for adults in some ways. And so I started just sort of on a whim taking pictures of people in the crowd, and it made me sort of start paying a lot more attention to those visual cues that especially the candidates they think so much about what they're wearing on stage, what image they're projecting.
Give me some highlights from 2012 and maybe even beyond.
Yeah, so well, it's really fascinating, especially when you're sort of having this whiplash of going to several different states a day, because obviously like the trends and what people are wearing across the country differ so much. But people in Nevada, for example, I remember on Halloween I was with Romney at a rally there, and there was this little girl who must have spent just hours on building this Romney superhero costume, and she had like the glasses and her torch and the whole pose down. And so that was, you know, everyone was saying that people weren't enthusiastic about Romney, but there certainly were some who were. I remember also it was this very cold morning somewhere in Ohio, which we went back to so many times, where there was this little girl who was so proud of her button, which was Hot Chicks Vote Republican, which her mom was letting her wear that one day. And then also it was interesting, you know, in places like Michigan and Ohio again, you would see sort of this high-low thing. Like in Michigan, there would be these women with these fabulous furs because it was freezing cold. In Youngstown, I saw my first man fur, which was this enormous fur coat that the guy had draped over his chair. And it's just really fun to talk to voters sort of about why they're wearing what they're wearing and what they brought to the campaign trail.
What's important in politics is not just what the fans are wearing and who's at the rallies, but also what the candidates are wearing.
Right. I mean, I think that's a big part of this, is that so much of political campaigns are really just straight political theater. And the amount of thought from operatives that goes into selecting a debate tie, is it red, blue, what kind of pattern do you have on there if you're trying to appeal to independents, for example. And I think that it's been really a fun way to think about politics too, because the candidates do spend so much time thinking about what image they want to project, and it depends on which place they're in at that moment. The best example in the upcoming 2016 cycle is Rick Perry, who really struggled in the last campaign to project a very serious image. And I remember covering him in New Hampshire in 2012, and he was out strolling through this fair. You know, he had like a checked or seersucker jacket and his cowboy boots. And this time I was just in New Hampshire with him a couple months ago. He's got sort of the square intellectual glasses. He's given up the cowboy boots, which he says is partly because of his back, wearing very sensible shoes, trying to project a much more sort of straightforward intellectual image. And I think the person who's had the most fun with this is probably Hillary Clinton, because as she points out, there's been so much like criticism and scrutiny of her style over very many years, and now her lines about her scrunchies and her pantsuits, they're part of her Twitter profile. They're huge laugh and applause lines at the rallies that she does, and sort of say a lot about the kind of candidate that she's trying to be now, or perhaps will be if she decides to run in 2016.
So you were saying Rick Perry has given up his cowboy boots, but one
Right.
person who hasn't given up their cowboy boots is Maggie Fox, a wife of Senator Mark Udall
Right,
from
in
Colorado. She has these red cowboy boots that you've been noticing on the campaign trail. He's up for re-election this year.
Yeah, it's one of the tightest races in the country in Colorado, and I was just out there last week. It's Senator Mark Udall, who is being challenged by Cory Gardner, the congressman, and as we've written a lot about at the LA Times, that race has really centered around women's issues. Udall has tried to make an issue of Congressman Gardner's position on abortion, personhood, birth control, and it's been this constant back and forth. And so while they've been pushing that message, Maggie Fox, Udall's wife, was on the campaign trail all the time, and she wears these red cowboy boots that her husband gave her every single day. So you can imagine that's sort of difficult matching her outfits to that. But she's talked a lot about how, to her, they've become this symbol of women's power and women's choices. And so she goes out and talks to women's groups. She now has these buttons that I think say "Red Boots for Udall," and hands them out to women and makes that the centerpiece of the talks that she gives, and in trying to impress on voters that this election is important.
Another woman you've been paying attention to on the campaign trail in 2014 is Joni Ernst of Iowa.
Right.
Can you
Another very, very tight race. She is probably one of the best candidates that the Republicans have this year, and she's got a very varied background. She's a soldier, she's a mom, she, you know, and she likes to talk a lot about how she was this farm girl from Iowa. And so she's done some really interesting things in her ads. She really broke through with this ad of herself in the barnyard, with talking about how she'd grown up castrating hogs, and so she wasn't afraid to take on pork in Washington. So she's in her Carhartt jacket and sort of projecting that farm girl image. And then after becoming the Republicans' nominee, she did sort of these much softer ads. The women's vote obviously is going to be very important there, you know, in a sweater set at a table. And so it's just been a really interesting way that she's used those different pieces of imagery to tell the story of who she is.
Well, thank you so much for your insights. It's been really fun.
Of course, my pleasure.
You can get more of Maeve's stories on LATimes.com, and you can follow her on Twitter at Maeve Reston and on Instagram, and check out the hashtag Campaign Fashion Report.